The SNP say the Scottish Parliament alone should have the right to hold a referendum on independence at a time of its choice, currently 2014. But the UK government says any referendum should be held within the next 18 months and that Westminster must give Scotland the legal power to actually hold it, or the next vote would be open to potential legal challenges and uncertainty. It's the latest step in what's fast becoming not only a political conflict over the future of Scotland and the UK, but now also a constitutional minefield. Well, to discuss both the political and constitutional ramifications of a referendum on Scottish independence, I'm joined in the studio here in London by Ben Harris-Quinney. He's chairman of the Bow Group, a leading centre-right think tank in London. Nigel Toft, he's a member of London's Chatham House Institute and he lectures in constitutional and international law at London Metropolitan University. And on the line from the north of Scotland by Rob Gibson, he's an SNP member of the Scottish Parliament for Caithness, Sutherland and Ross. And Mr. Gibson, if I can come to you first of all, do you accept that as things stand at the moment, the Scottish Government doesn't actually have the legal authority to hold a binding referendum on independence?
The Scottish Government may not have that for a binding referendum. The Scottish Government is seeking a referendum such as has always been practiced in the UK, that is, that it is advisory and it has the powers to do that. The Scottish Parliament represents the Scottish people, and in our constitutional theory, the Scottish people are sovereign.
I'm looking at the SNP manifesto from 2011. In the section on independence, it says, and I quote, "A yes vote will mean Scotland becomes an independent nation." Strictly speaking, that's not actually correct, is it?
It would be, because, in fact, when people have referenda on constitutional matters, the effect of the public statement, if it's in favour of an item, is not going to be overturned in the courts of law, which other people might wish to do. The force of democracy is such that an advisory referendum would set the momentum for the negotiations to create that peaceful independence for Scotland from the UK.
But that rather more nuanced position is not alluded to in the manifesto. It simply says a yes vote will mean Scotland becomes...
snapshot. The manifesto is a short snapshot of what our policies are, and indeed, as you might know, people were given a consultation paper, Our Voice, Our Future, the Constitution in Scotland, which was consulted on during the last Parliament.
Nigel Toft, if I can come to you, what is the constitutional position? Does Scotland have the legal authority to actually hold a referendum on independence or anything else for that matter?
Well, not a binding referendum. As to listen to Mr. Salmon speak, you'd think that Scotland's already a sovereign state. Well, of course, that's not the case. The sovereign entity is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and sovereignty within the United Kingdom lies in the United Kingdom Parliament. Constitutional change in the United Kingdom is actually very easy to achieve, unlike other countries where constitutions are entrenched. Our constitution is not entrenched. So a simple majority in Parliament to, for example, pass an Independence of Scotland Act would repeal the Act of Union of 1707. So independence would be for Scotland would be easy to achieve, but it could only be achieved by the United Kingdom Parliament, where sovereignty lies.
Ben Harris-Quinney, do you object to the idea of holding a referendum at all?
No, I don't object to the idea, and I think Nick Clegg spoke today on the issue quite directly, and spoke for the coalition government in saying that, you know, we are supportive as a British government, as a UK government, of the right of the Scottish people to determine their own fate, their own destiny. However, I think there's a very strong argument to say that would be the wrong route and solution for the United Kingdom as a whole, as a whole, and also for Scotland and England as constituent nations or constituent parties within that. I think we would both be poorer for it. I am passionately for the Union to remain as it is, and I think the government holds that position, and certainly the Conservative Party holds that position.
But to listen to the government speak, the Prime Minister, David Cameron in particular, it does seem to be that Westminster is trying to decide the terms, the timing and so on of a referendum. Alex Salmond has said he wants to hold the referendum in 2014. Shouldn't he be able to hold it at a time of his choice? He heads a government in Scotland that people voted for.
I think if you want to talk about manipulating the timetable, the first person to talk about is Alex Salmond, indeed, because that's very much been his motivation from the outset, and much of the drive of his government, the drive of his legislature, is about this referendum vote. And of course, there are many other issues going on, both in Scotland and in the world, that need focus also. And he is focusing a considerable amount of time and effort purely on the issue of Scottish independence. So I think very much he's doing that more so than the UK government are.
That's not true.
Well, you may say it's not true, but...
well, I'm in the Parliament and we're dealing with matters that are other than independence day and daily.
No, of course, the Parliament is dealing with that matter, but if you look at the name of the party to which you belong, it is clearly your lead issue, and the lead issue in your manifesto, Scottish independence.
That's correct, but we're dealing with matters like the Common Agriculture Policy, we're dealing with the threat of the welfare reform cuts, we're dealing with the whole budget nature of cuts of 1.3 billion to try and provide services and try and build a new economy with the limited powers that we have.
My point is not that you're only dealing with a single issue, is that is the most important issue for Alex Salmond, and I think it's certainly not the most important issue for David Cameron. In that sense, I don't think he's trying to manipulate the political form to ensure that issue falls most favourably for him and for his government. I think Alex Salmond is.
Rob Gibson.
I think it was interesting to hear how people reacted in Scotland when David Cameron tried to put conditions on a referendum.
Let me ask you, Rob Gibson. Do you think
by over 450 in the last 4 days?
Rob Gibson, let me ask you directly. Do you think there is an attempt by the Westminster government to directly control the terms of the referendum?
Of course there is. The way in which the Westminster government has behaved from time immemorial is to retain as much power in London as possible. Devolution, as defined by Enoch Powell, was about power devolved as power retained. And we basically in Scotland have got to a stage in the process of devolution that we want to have a vote about having full powers. And that obviously is going to be interfered with in many ways by the Westminster government, not least by David Cameron trying to stop us having 16 and 17-year-olds voting, of us choosing the date, and indeed of the kinds of questions that could be put in that referendum.
But it would be the United Kingdom Parliament would have to pass the eventual act that gave Scotland independence. Obviously it has a concern as to how that act would eventually appear.
Well, I'm quite sure that would be the case, but really the battle will have taken place, the result will have been gained, and the Parliament in London will finally agree to what has happened on the battlefield. And, we are intent that it should be a democratic arrangement, and it should be a velvet divorce, if you like. And that way we can have the kind of arguments about the powers we should have, and not just on the process of leading to the referendum as we're trying to be forced into by David Cameron, Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband.
Is it going to be a straight yes/no, or are we going to see what's being called the Devo Max option, i.e. more powers for the Scottish Parliament short of full independence?
Well, I think the SNP government will be consulting in the next fortnight on all of these options, and there's a large number of people who express a view in Civic Scotland that having more powers is something that can't be ignored.
Just a reminder, you're listening to The Voice of Russia from London with me, Scott Craig. Today we're discussing the implications of a Scottish constitutional referendum. I'm discussing this with Ben Harris-Quinney, Nigel Toft and Rob Gibson. Ben Harris-Quinney, on the question of Devo Max, more powers, do you think this is possibly a compromise that in the end actually voters in Scotland will go for?
I think it's a compromise that would have more likely been achieved if Alex Salmond hadn't pushed so hard on the referendum issue. I think the problem is that when Devo Max is explored in the current form that it's being talked about, what it actually does is gives Scotland an unfair deal, or gives the United Kingdom an unfair deal, and gives Scotland probably too much for the bargain. I think what you would be looking at in a situation like that is the rest of the United Kingdom being unwilling to go forward with such an arrangement that gives Scotland a great deal of powers without the responsibility of an independent sovereign nation. And I think that some of the language here is indicative. Talking about a battlefield, I don't think that is the language we need, and that is really what I meant when I said that Alex Salmond is pushing forward this sort of agenda in this sort of language. I don't think David Cameron is.
Nigel
Well,
Toff.
I'm going to remove.
Well, if a Devo Max option was included and was favoured, then from the point of view of a workable constitution, I do hope that the position of Scottish MPs in the Westminster Parliament was properly looked at on this occasion, rather than just passed over when the first devolution arrangements were made. What in earth would the Scottish MPs of the Westminster Parliament be doing if the Devo Max option was selected?
Rob Gibson, you wanted to come in there.
No, I was going to say, I'm not wanting to talk about battles and things like that, but I was saying that the way in which a contest takes place of ideas between the status quo, Devo Max and independence will be thrashed out, and the people of Scotland will vote. What happens after that in the parliaments are only a case of them signing it off. The fact is that if people decide to go that way, then it's an unstoppable approach. And to talk about it not being an appropriate time to do, we are at the threshold of major energy developments in the north here, all over, which have European context. Scotland is a member in waiting in the European Union, and we all have an opportunity here to benefit from this. The powers issue is being sidelined by talking about the process, and that's why I used the question about battlefield, because people are trying to avoid us from dealing with the matters of life itself, the bread and butter issues which will allow people to be better off, and that's why the powers issue about this Parliament have to be discussed in detail, and that's why Devo Max must be discussed.
Ben Harris-Quinney, do you actually agree with that, in the sense that it's really time to get the procedural aspects of this question sorted so that the political questions can actually be definitively settled?
What this debate has done is created further uncertainty about the future of the United Kingdom at a time when the European Union and the Eurozone is in its most fragile states. Now, I mean, you can talk about energy security, you can talk about the option for renewables off the Scottish coast, but that is too much of a finite part of a far wider UK economy. And whilst there may be significant opportunities there, it's not going to be enough to hang an economy from. I think what we've seen in since the economic crisis with the bailout of HBOS and RBS is a significant contribution from the UK government to banks and institutions which Scotland itself wouldn't have been able to bail out. And I think if we continue to have economic uncertainty in the future, Scotland will find itself in a very difficult position if it was an independent nation.
We're very nearly out of time, but my last question, Rob Gibson, is just looking at the numbers. I think support for outright separation is running, depending on which poll you look at, but the latest social attitude survey put it at 32%. It did, however, put support for Devo Max at around 68%. Just briefly, if you could, how confident are you that you're actually going to be able to turn the 32% number around and actually gain enough support for outright independence?
I think when people start to see what you can do with an independent government as the debate develops, that they'll feel more confident in so doing, and as our economy slowly recovers, they will also feel confidence that we could do even better than we are at the present time, because there's a lot of inward investment into Scotland just now, and growing confidence that Scotland as a nation can make its way in the world, and that as a friend of our neighbours in the south, that we will be a much more useful partner in these islands and beyond. And that's why I believe that we need the time to have the debate, and indeed that people will vote for independence as a result.
There, I'm afraid we must leave it. We're out of time. But my thanks today to my guests, Ben Harris-Quinney, Nigel Toft and Rob Gibson. And stay with us on Referendum on Independence.
The Scottish Government may not have that for a binding referendum. The Scottish Government is seeking a referendum such as has always been practiced in the UK, that is, that it is advisory and it has the powers to do that. The Scots
have a referendum on Scottish independence. I'm joined in the studio here in London by Ben Harris-Quinney. He's chairman of the Bow Group, a leading centre-right think tank in London. Nigel Toft, he's a member of London's Chatham House Institute and he lectures in constitutional and international law at London Metropolitan University. And on the line from the North, hold it, or the next vote would be open to potential legal challenges and uncertainty. It's the latest step in what's fast becoming not only a political conflict over the future of Scotland and the UK, but now also a constitutional minefield. Well, to discuss both the political and constitutional ramifications, the SNP say the Scottish Parliament alone should have the right to hold a referendum on independence at a time of its choice, currently 2014. But the UK government says any referendum should be held within the next 18 months and that Westminster must give Scotland the legal power to act. North of Scotland by Rob Gibson. He's an SNP member of the Scottish Parliament for Caithness, Sutherland and Ross. And Mr. Gibson, if I can come to you first of all, do you accept that as things stand at the moment, the Scottish Government doesn't actually have the legal authority to hold a binding